My husband kissed me goodbye that Tuesday morning like he had every day for 12 years, but this time I tasted another woman's lipstick on his lips. I didn't know it then, of course. I just thought my coffee was bitter. By evening, I discovered he'd been living an entire second life for 3 years. A life that included a house I'd never seen, credit cards I didn't know existed, and a woman who called him by a nickname I'd never heard before. But the thing that broke me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing I'd been paying for it all along. Let me back up. My name is Sarah, I'm 42, and until that Tuesday, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. Tom and I met in college, got married right after graduation, built what everyone called a stable relationship. You know the type: joint bank accounts, matching coffee mugs, arguments about whose turn it is to take out the trash. Normal stuff. Tom worked in insurance sales, always traveling for conferences and client meetings. I managed the local library branch downtown. We had routines. Tuesday night was pizza and Netflix. Saturdays were for grocery shopping and yard work. Sundays, we'd visit his mother in the nursing home, bringing her those little chocolate candies she hoarded in her nightstand drawer. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself with fireworks and dramatic music. It creeps in through tiny cracks you didn't even know existed. Like how Tom started working out again after years of dad-bod comfort. How he suddenly cared about thread count when buying sheets. How he'd disappear into the bathroom with his phone for 20-minute stomach issues. I should have paid attention when he started pronouncing pasta differently, like he'd been hanging around someone who grew up differently than we did. Or when he began using phrases like "that's fire" and "no cap," a 45-year-old insurance salesman trying to sound cool. But you know what? When you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You think they're just evolving. The first real crack appeared on a Monday night in March. Tom was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a text from someone named Conference Coordinator. Seemed innocent enough, except the message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Wear the blue shirt I got you." My blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. Conference coordinators don't buy shirts for married men. They don't call them baby. They definitely don't send texts at 9 p.m. on a Monday about seeing someone tonight when that someone is supposed to be home with his wife. I stared at that phone until the screen went dark, my reflection staring back at me from the black surface. In that moment, I looked like a stranger to myself. When Tom came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, whistling some song I didn't recognize, I almost said something. Almost. Instead, I pretended to be asleep and listened to him get dressed in the dark. He left the house at 10:30 p.m., claiming he forgot some important papers at the office and needed to grab them before his early morning meeting. Funny thing about lies, once you start looking for them, they're everywhere. That night, lying in our king-sized bed that suddenly felt enormous and empty, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who my husband really was. The next morning, after Tom left for his client breakfast meeting, another new addition to his vocabulary, he used to just grab coffee at the gas station, I did something I'd never done in 12 years of marriage. I went through his stuff. Not just a casual glance through his dresser drawers, but a full investigation. I felt like a detective in my own home, searching for clues to solve the mystery of my own life. Isn't that ridiculous? Having to investigate whether your own marriage is real? I started with his desk in our home office. Tom was usually pretty organized, but I noticed new patterns. Receipts for restaurants I'd never been to. Gas station purchases in towns I'd never heard of. A credit card statement for an account I didn't know existed, with charges that made my stomach drop. Victoria's Secret, $247. Pottery Barn, $1,200. Something called Intimate Wellness Spa, $300. Wine and Spirits on 5th Street, $150. Every Friday for 6 months. But here's the thing that really got me, a charge for 2 tickets to Hamilton. Tom hated musicals. I'd been begging him to take me to shows for years, and he always said they were pretentious nonsense. Yet here was proof he'd spent $400 on Hamilton tickets for someone who apparently appreciated culture more than his wife did. I photocopied everything, not because I was planning for a future confrontation, but because I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. When your reality shifts this dramatically, you start questioning your own memory, your own perception of truth. The real breakthrough came when I found Tom's old iPhone in his underwear drawer. You know how guys are with technology. They upgrade and shove the old phone in a drawer, just in case. Well, Tom's just-in-case phone was a goldmine of information he forgot to delete. Photos. Hundreds of them. Tom at restaurants I'd never seen, his arm around a woman with long dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. Tom in what looked like a hotel room, wearing that blue shirt the conference coordinator had mentioned. Tom at a beach house that definitely wasn't our usual vacation spot in the mountains. But the photos that made me sit down on our bedroom floor and just breathe were the ones that looked like a completely different life. Tom and this woman at what appeared to be a housewarming party, cutting a cake together like they were celebrating something significant. Tom wearing a wedding ring I'd never seen before, not his real one, but a different style, more modern, more expensive looking. And then I found the video that changed everything. It was short, maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours as I watched it. Tom and this woman, I later learned her name was Madison, in what was clearly their shared living space. Not a hotel, not a temporary thing, but a home. With their photos on the mantel, their coffee mugs on the counter, their mail stacked neatly on a table by the door. Tom was reading something aloud, some kind of official document, while Madison clapped excitedly. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard enough. Mortgage approval, congratulations, and Madison squealing. We did it, baby. Our first house together. I sat there on my bedroom floor, holding a phone that contained evidence of my husband's entirely separate existence, and laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was screaming, and I wasn't ready for screaming yet. See, here's what nobody tells you about discovering a betrayal this massive. The logistics are almost more shocking than the emotional part. At least initially. Your brain goes into problem-solving mode because the alternative, processing the emotional devastation, is too overwhelming to handle all at once. So I started making lists. Questions that needed answers. How long had this been going on? Where was he getting the money? Did Madison know about me? Did anyone else know? How many lies had I been living with? What else didn't I know? That afternoon, I called in sick to work and drove to the address I'd found on one of those credit card statements. It was a neighborhood about 20 minutes from our house, filled with new construction and young families. The kind of place Tom and I had looked at years ago but decided was too trendy for us. The house was beautiful. Cream-colored siding, black shutters, a red door with a wreath that screamed Pinterest perfection. Madison's car was in the driveway, a white BMW SUV that cost more than I made in 6 months at the library. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours, watching this house that represented my husband's secret life. At 4:30, Madison came outside to water plants on the front porch. She was even prettier in person than in the photos. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with the kind of effortless style that suggested money and confidence. She looked happy, comfortable, like someone who'd never had to question whether her life was real. I should have felt angry seeing her. Instead, I felt curious. What did she know? What had Tom told her about his situation? Did she think he was divorced? Single? Did she know she was part of a massive lie? Or was she being lied to as well? That evening, Tom came home at his usual time, whistling that same unfamiliar song. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and settled into his recliner to watch SportsCenter like every other Tuesday for the past decade. The normalcy of it was almost surreal. "How was your day?" he asked, like he genuinely cared, like he hadn't spent the past 3 years building an entire life I knew nothing about. "Fine," I said, studying his face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. Same old stuff at the library. Yours? Good meeting with the Johnson account. Looks like they'll be expanding their coverage. He said this with the same tone he'd been using for years when discussing work. Either Tom was a sociopathic liar, or he'd compartmentalized his life so completely that he genuinely felt normal sitting here with me. I made dinner, his favorite, chicken parmesan, and we ate while watching a rerun of The Office. Tom laughed at all the same jokes he'd been laughing at for years. He helped clear the table without being asked. He even complimented the meal, saying I'd outdone myself tonight. It was like being in a play where only one person had the script. After dinner, while Tom was in the shower, I made another decision. I was going to confront Madison before I confronted him. I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. Was she a victim too, or was she a willing participant in the destruction of my marriage? The next day, I took a personal day and drove back to the cream-colored house. This time, I walked up to that perfect red door and knocked. Madison answered wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, looking like she'd just finished a workout. Up close, she was even younger than I'd thought. Maybe 28, with clear skin and bright eyes that suggested she'd never experienced the kind of betrayal that aged you from the inside out. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, with just a hint of curiosity about why a stranger was at her door on a Wednesday morning. "I think we need to talk," I said. "It's about Tom." The change in her expression was immediate and telling. The polite smile disappeared, replaced by something between confusion and concern. She knew something was wrong, but I could tell she wasn't sure what. "Tom," she repeated, like she was buying time to figure out how to respond. "Tom Henderson. About 6 feet 2 inches, brown hair, works in insurance, drives a gray Toyota Camry, has a small scar on his left hand from when he tried to fix a fence when we first got married 12 years ago." Madison's face went white. She stepped back from the door, her hand gripping the frame like she needed the support. 12 years, she whispered. 12 years, I confirmed. "I'm Sarah, his wife." What happened next wasn't what I expected. Madison didn't slam the door or deny everything or get defensive. She started crying. Not angry tears or guilty tears, but the kind of devastated crying that comes from having your world completely shattered in the span of 30 seconds. "Oh my God," she kept saying. "Oh my God, oh my God." She invited me in, which was surreal, sitting in the living room of my husband's secret house, drinking coffee with my husband's secret girlfriend, both of us trying to piece together how we'd ended up in this situation. "He told me he was divorced," Madison said, her voice shaky. 3 years ago, when we met at that conference in Atlanta. He said the divorce had been finalized 2 years earlier, that it was amicable but painful to talk about. I thought I was helping him heal. The conference story checked out. Tom had indeed gone to Atlanta 3 years ago for a work conference. What I hadn't known was that he'd met Madison there, told her he was available, and started an entirely separate relationship based on a lie that made us both victims. "He has photos of you," I said gently, "in his old phone. You two look happy." Madison laughed bitterly. "We were happy. At least, I thought we were. We've been living together for 8 months. We just bought this house together in February." God, this is embarrassing. I was waiting for him to propose. I thought maybe this summer, when we take that trip to Europe he's been planning. Europe. Tom hadn't mentioned any European vacation to me. But then again, Tom hadn't mentioned Madison either. "Can I ask you something?" Madison said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "And please be honest. Are you happy? In your marriage?" It was such a simple question, but I realized I hadn't asked myself that in years. Was I happy? I was comfortable. I was content. I was used to Tom, to our routines, to our predictable life. But happy? I thought I was, I said finally. I thought we both were. But apparently, Tom was so unhappy that he created an entirely different life where he could be happy with someone else. We talked for 3 hours. Madison showed me around the house, their house, and I saw how Tom had basically recreated our life, but with upgrades. Better furniture, better appliances, better location. It was like he'd taken everything familiar and comfortable about our marriage and improved on it with someone younger, prettier, and apparently wealthier than me. Because here's what I learned. Madison wasn't just some random woman Tom had been having an affair with. She was a successful marketing executive who made twice what Tom did. She'd been paying for most of their lifestyle, the house down payment, the BMW, those expensive dinners, even the Hamilton tickets. Tom had found himself a sugar mama and convinced her she was getting a divorced man ready for a committed relationship. The money, I said suddenly. Tom's been spending money we don't have. I've been wondering how he was affording all these charges on credit cards I didn't know about. Madison looked confused. What charges? Tom doesn't have any credit cards. We talked about it when we moved in together. He said he preferred to live debt-free after his divorce. I've been paying for everything on my cards because he said it would help my credit score. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Tom hadn't been spending our money on Madison. He'd been letting Madison spend her money on him while still living our regular life with me. He was essentially being supported by two women who each thought they were his only financial responsibility. It was brilliant in the most disgusting way possible. Madison, I said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Has Tom ever asked you for money directly? Loans, help with bills, anything like that? She was quiet for a long moment. Well, there was the thing with his mother's medical bills. He said insurance wasn't covering everything, and he was stressed about the costs. I offered to help, and he was so grateful. He said he'd pay me back when his next commission check came in, but I told him not to worry about it. Family comes first, right? My mouth went dry. How much? $15,000. But Sarah, it was for his mother's medical care. You can't fault him for... Madison. I interrupted gently. Tom's mother died 4 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, trying to process information that didn't fit with anything she'd been told. That's not possible, she said finally. We visit her every Sunday. We bring her those little chocolates she loves. She asks about when we're getting married, tells me stories about Tom as a little boy. What nursing home? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Sunset Manor on Elm Street. Room 247. Sunset Manor. Where Tom and I had been visiting his mother every Sunday until she passed away from pneumonia 4 years ago. Room 247 had been her room. After she died, Tom had been so devastated that he couldn't bear to go back there. We'd even avoided driving past the place for months because it made him too sad. Except apparently, he'd been going back. Every Sunday. With Madison. Pretending his dead mother was still alive, using their visits as a way to maintain his false identity as a man whose mother was still living and needed expensive medical care. Madison, I said as gently as I could, I think we need to take a drive. 30 minutes later, we were standing in the lobby of Sunset Manor, asking to visit the resident in room 247. The receptionist, a kind older woman named Betty who remembered me from the years of Sunday visits, looked confused. Room 247? Honey, that's been empty since Mrs. Henderson passed. We haven't had anyone in there for months. Are you sure you have the right room number? Madison grabbed my arm. This doesn't make sense. We were just here last Sunday. Tom talked to her for an hour about his work, about our house, about... Her voice trailed off as the reality of the situation hit her. Ma'am, Betty said gently, addressing Madison, I've been working here for 15 years. Mrs. Henderson was such a sweet lady, and I remember her son Tom very well. But he stopped visiting after the memorial service. I always wondered how he was doing. We left Sunset Manor in silence. Madison sat in my passenger seat, staring out the window as we drove back toward her house. Every few minutes, she'd start to say something, then stop. What do you say when you discover that someone you love has been lying about literally everything, including whether his mother is alive? The chocolates, she said finally. Every Sunday, we'd buy those little chocolates for her. Tom said they were her favorites, that they reminded her of her childhood. Where did those chocolates go? I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe Tom threw them away. Maybe he ate them himself. Maybe he saved them in some twisted shrine to his dead mother and his fake life. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that for months, Madison had been buying candy for a dead woman while being emotionally manipulated by a man who was using his mother's memory as a prop in his elaborate deception. When we got back to Madison's house, to their house, she asked if I wanted to come in again. I almost said no. I'd learned enough for one day, uncovered enough lies to process for a week. But something made me follow her inside. I need to show you something, she said, leading me upstairs to what was obviously the master bedroom. It was beautiful, decorated in soft grays and whites, with fresh flowers on the nightstand and photos of Madison and Tom throughout what I now knew was their fake relationship. She opened the closet and pointed to Tom's side. Look at his clothes. I looked. Tom's wardrobe had definitely improved since we'd been married. Better brands, more stylish cuts, colors I'd never seen him wear at home. But that wasn't what Madison was showing me. The tags, she said. Check the tags. I pulled out a few shirts and looked at the price tags. They were still attached. Not just a few items, but almost everything. Shirts that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, pants that were worth half my car payment, shoes that cost more than our mortgage payment. He never wears them, Madison said. Not really. He'll put something on when he's here, but I always thought it was weird that he kept the tags on everything. He said he was afraid of damaging them, that he wanted to keep them nice. But I understood. Tom was keeping the tags on because this wasn't his real life. This was his costume life, his fantasy life, his vacation from being married to me. He could put on the expensive clothes and play house with Madison, but at the end of the day, he knew he was going back to his real life with me, where he wore his old jeans and favorite ratty t-shirts. Even his betrayal was part-time. Madison, I said, what time does Tom usually get here on weekdays? She thought about it. Around 7 p.m., usually. He says he likes to decompress from work before coming home. Why? Tom told me he worked late most weekdays, getting home around 8:30 or 9 p.m., which meant he was spending an hour and a half with Madison every day, then coming home to me and pretending he'd been at the office the whole time. I was seeing the full picture now, and it was more elaborate than I'd imagined. Tom wasn't just having an affair. He was living a double life so complete and detailed that both Madison and I had been supporting it without knowing about each other. He had 2 homes, 2 relationships, 2 completely different identities. With me, he was comfortable, settled Tom who watched sports and ate pizza and visited his mother's grave on her birthday. With Madison, he was sophisticated, cultured Tom who appreciated theater and fine dining, and had a living mother who needed expensive medical care. I have to ask you something difficult, I told Madison. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you and Tom talked about marriage? Madison's face crumpled. We were going to announce our engagement at Christmas. He said he wanted to make it special, that he'd been saving up for the perfect ring. He even asked about my ring size last month, said he was thinking about having something custom made. Christmas was 8 months away. Tom had been planning to propose to Madison while still married to me, which meant he'd been planning to become a bigamist, or he'd been planning to divorce me without telling me, or I couldn't even imagine what his long-term plan had been. Sarah, Madison said quietly, what are we going to do? It was such a simple question, but it contained multitudes. What were we going to do about Tom? About the house Madison had bought thinking she was building a life with a single man? About the money she'd given him for his supposedly sick mother? About the engagement she'd been looking forward to? About my marriage that had apparently been a sham for 3 years? I don't know, I said honestly. I've never been in this situation before. Do you love him? She asked. I thought about that question for a long time. Did I love Tom? I loved the man I thought he was. I loved our history together, our shared memories, our inside jokes and comfortable routines. But did I love the man who was capable of this level of deception? The man who could kiss me goodbye every morning and spend his evenings with another woman? The man who could use his dead mother's memory to steal money from his girlfriend? I don't know if the person I love actually exists, I said finally. Madison nodded. I keep thinking about all the conversations we've had, all the plans we've made, all the times he told me he loved me. Were any of those moments real? Or was he just acting? We spent the rest of the afternoon going through Tom's things in Madison's house, looking for more evidence of his deception. We found business cards for restaurants he'd never taken me to, ticket stubs for concerts he'd never mentioned, receipts for gifts I'd never received. But the most damaging evidence was in his bedside drawer, a notebook where Tom had apparently been keeping track of his lies. Different pages for different aspects of his double life, with notes about what he'd told each of us, important dates to remember, and even reminders about which personality to use with which woman. One page was titled Sarah and included reminders like doesn't like spicy food, prefers movies to theater, thinks expensive restaurants are wasteful, and believes mom died 4 years ago. Another page was titled Madison and included notes like loves trying new cuisines, wants to travel to Europe, enjoys cultural activities, and worried about mom's health. He'd turned our relationships into a game, with cheat sheets to help him keep his story straight. The notebook also contained financial calculations that made my stomach turn. Tom had been tracking how much money he could get from Madison under various pretenses, how much he could spend without me noticing, and how long he could maintain both relationships before something had to give. According to his notes, he'd planned to ask me for a divorce in the fall after Madison's engagement ring was purchased and their European vacation was booked. He was going to tell me he needed space to find himself and move in with Madison temporarily while we worked things out. But he had no intention of working anything out. He was planning to let me believe there was hope for our marriage while building a life with her. The cruelest part? His notes indicated that he expected me to be relieved about the separation, that he thought I'd been as unhappy as he was, but too comfortable to make a change. He'd convinced himself that leaving me would actually be doing me a favor. By 6 p.m., Madison and I had created a complete timeline of Tom's deception. We knew where he went when he said he was working late, where our money had really gone, how he'd manipulated both of us into supporting his fantasy life. He'll be here soon, Madison said, looking at her watch. What do we do? Do we confront him together? Separately? Do we pretend we don't know? I looked around the house that my husband had been calling home for 8 months, at the life he'd built with another woman using lies and manipulation, at the evidence of betrayal that was so comprehensive it took us 6 hours to catalog it all. We're going to do something he's not expecting, I said. We're going to tell him the truth. At 7:15 p.m., Tom's key turned in Madison's front door. He called out, "Hey babe, sorry I'm late." Traffic was terrible, in the same cheerful tone he used when coming home to me. He walked into the living room expecting to find Madison, and instead found both of us sitting on the couch, surrounded by evidence of his double life. The look on his face went through several phases: confusion, recognition, panic, and, finally, resignation. He knew immediately that his carefully constructed world had collapsed. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I can explain." "Actually," I said, standing up, "I don't think you can. But you're going to try anyway." For the next hour, Tom attempted to spin a story that somehow made his behavior understandable. He talked about being unhappy in our marriage, but not wanting to hurt me. He claimed he'd fallen in love with Madison, but hadn't meant for it to get so complicated. He insisted that the money he'd taken from Madison was always intended to be paid back. He even tried to argue that he'd been protecting both of us by keeping his relationships separate. But here's the thing about lies. Once you see them clearly, they can't fool you anymore. Every word out of Tom's mouth sounded hollow and manipulative. Every excuse was an insult to our intelligence. "Tom," Madison said finally, "your mother is dead." That simple statement cut through all of his elaborate explanations. Tom looked like he'd been slapped. "You've been taking me to visit an empty room for months," she continued. "Taking my money for medical bills that don't exist. Making me buy chocolates for a woman who's been dead for 4 years. Tom's face crumpled. Of all the lies he'd been caught in, this one seemed to hit him the hardest. Maybe because it involved his mother, or maybe because it was so unnecessarily cruel to Madison. "I know how this looks," he said desperately. "But I never meant. I was going to tell you both the truth. I just needed more time to figure out how to handle everything." 3 years, I said. "You had 3 years to figure it out. Instead, you bought a house with another woman while married to me, stole money using your dead mother as an excuse, and planned to make Madison your second wife without divorcing your first." Tom had no response to that. "What I want to know," Madison said, "is what you thought was going to happen. Long term. Did you think you could stay married to Sarah forever while engaged to me? Were you planning to have children with both of us? 2 families who never knew about each other?" Tom looked exhausted. "I don't know. I kept thinking something would work itself out. That maybe Sarah would want a divorce, or maybe you'd get tired of waiting for me to commit, or maybe I'd figure out a way to make everyone happy." "Make everyone happy?" I repeated. "By lying to everyone?" "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Tom said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely broken rather than manipulative. "But you did hurt us," Madison said. "You hurt us both, in different ways, for years." What happened next surprised everyone, including me. I started laughing. Not the bitter laugh from earlier in the week, but genuine, helpless laughter at the absurdity of the entire situation. "You know what's funny?" I said between laughs. "I spent 12 years married to someone I didn't really know, and Madison spent 3 years dating someone who didn't actually exist. None of us have been in a real relationship this entire time." Tom looked offended. "Our marriage was real, Sarah. What Madison and I had was real." "No," I said firmly. "Real relationships are built on honesty. What we had was built on lies, routine, and whatever version of yourself you thought I could handle. What you had with Madison was built on lies, manipulation, and whatever version of yourself you thought she would find attractive." I looked at Madison, who was nodding in agreement. "The Tom who watches sports and eats pizza with me isn't the same Tom who goes to theater and fine dining with you," I continued. "And neither of those Toms is honest enough to be worth loving." Tom tried to argue, to defend himself, to make promises about changing and being honest going forward. But Madison and I had moved past listening to him. We'd spent the day uncovering the truth, and the truth was that Tom was fundamentally a coward who chose deception over difficult conversations, manipulation over honesty, and fantasy over reality. "I want you to pack your things and leave," Madison told him. "All of your things, including the clothes with the tags still on them." "Where am I supposed to go?" Tom asked, and the question revealed just how little he'd thought through the consequences of his actions. "That's not our problem anymore," I said. "You're a grown man who's been managing 2 separate lives for 3 years. I'm sure you'll figure something out." Tom left Madison's house that night with 2 suitcases and no idea where he was going. He tried calling me later, but I didn't answer. He tried texting Madison, but she blocked his number. For the first time in 3 years, Tom was facing the consequences of his choices without being able to manipulate either of us into making things easier for him. Madison and I didn't become best friends after that night, but we did stay in touch. She helped me understand the financial damage Tom had done, and I helped her navigate the process of removing his name from their shared accounts and mortgage. We both filed for restraining orders when Tom started showing up at our homes demanding to work things out. The divorce process was complicated by Tom's financial deception, but my lawyer was confident that I'd be able to recover some of the money he'd spent without my knowledge. Madison decided not to pursue the money Tom had taken from her, saying she considered it tuition for a very expensive lesson about trusting people too quickly. 6 months later, I ran into Madison at the grocery store. She looked different, lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying a weight she'd finally put down. "How are you doing?" she asked, and I could tell she genuinely wanted to know. Better, I said, and I meant it. It's weird, starting over at 42, but also freeing. I'm remembering who I was before I became half of a couple that wasn't actually real. Madison nodded. I keep thinking about all the time I wasted planning a future with someone who was planning a completely different future behind my back. But then I remind myself that at least now I know what red flags to watch for. We talked for a few minutes about our new lives, our new perspectives, our hard-earned wisdom about trusting people and recognizing manipulation. As we parted ways in the parking lot, Madison called out to me, "Sarah, thank you for knocking on my door that day, for telling me the truth when you could have just confronted Tom privately and left me in the dark." "Thank you for listening," I replied, "and for not slamming the door in my face." As I drove home to my newly quiet house, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal had been devastating, but the discovery process had been empowering. For the first time in years, I'd been proactive instead of reactive. I'd investigated, uncovered truth, made difficult decisions, and handled a crisis without falling apart. Tom had underestimated both Madison and me. He'd assumed we'd be too devastated or too dependent on him to function without him. Instead, we'd work together to expose his lies and take back control of our own lives. The house feels different now. Quieter, but not lonely. Simpler, but not empty. I've been redecorating, replacing the things that reminded me of Tom with things that make me happy. I've been taking classes at the community college, traveling to places Tom never wanted to visit, trying foods he claimed to dislike. I'm discovering that a lot of my preferences over the past 12 years were actually compromises I'd made to keep peace in a marriage that wasn't worth keeping peaceful. Do I miss being married? Sometimes. I miss having someone to share daily experiences with, someone to make decisions with, someone to come home to. But I don't miss being married to someone who is pretending to be someone else. I don't miss the version of myself I had to be to make that fake relationship work. People ask me if I'm angry, if I hate Tom, if I'm bitter about the wasted years. The truth is more complicated than that. I'm angry about the lies and the financial manipulation. I'm sad about the time I can't get back. But I'm also grateful that I found out the truth when I did, before I wasted even more years living a lie. Tom taught me something valuable, though he probably didn't mean to. You can't love someone you don't actually know, and you can't be loved by someone who doesn't know who you really are. The relationships I'm building now, friendships, family connections, even the possibility of romantic love again someday, are built